Hello friends, welcome you to the SMUS MOOC on Universal Design, Accessibility Planning and Social Inclusion. This MOOC has been created under the Global Center of Spatial Methods for Urban Sustainability at the Technical University of Berlin, funded by the German Academic Exchange Services, that is DAAD. This MOOC has been curated under the Laboratory of Inclusive Design at IIT Roorkee. Friends, my name is Professor Gaurav Raheja and I am a Professor of Architecture and Planning at IIT Roorkee. This is the last module of the ongoing MOOC. This is titled and focused upon Inclusive Urban Futures as Module 12. As part of its learning objectives, in this MOOC we shall focus to comprehend inclusivity as a holistic concept. Focusing on urban futures, it shall take us through various perspectives or lenses of inclusive approaches in urban contexts. And finally, this MOOC ends with a quick recap of all the modules that we've discussed before. So welcome you once again to Module 12 of Inclusive Urban Futures. Let's reflect upon the urban reflections that exist in our countries from the past. This is a scene or the narrative of Kolkata, the tram city, one of the East Indian cities with very high densities several years from the past. As we are moving forward, evolving into new urban infrastructures, the constant jugglery between space, people, technology keeps on going. And we witness new forms of urban development, new densities, new ways of generating built form, and many a times the scale of urban development is outpouring the human itself. Further, it's also getting intensified with fast-moving public transit system, popularly known as the mass rapid transit systems called the metros, and these becoming the lifelines of the complex web of the cities that are growing up in scale. Amidst all this, we as humans are looking forward for opportunities of employment, opportunities of public realm, and opportunities of livability and well-being. Despite all marginal groups, all vulnerabilities, we expect a human rights approach to be at the center of the future of urban development. Based on certain data, we are realizing that more and more people are now living in urban environments. Almost 3 million people in India migrate to urban areas annually in the pursuit of employment. By 2050, urban India will be home to 14% of the world's urban population. Friends, these backdrop glimpses are almost an example of the urban concretes as a sea and an ocean amidst which millions of humans and lives thrive upon. Urban growth is happening rapidly. Just for example, the city of New Delhi, as you see in this map, started with a small conglomerate. As it moved another decade, it moved further densifications. Then by the new millennium, 2000, as you can see some dense dots here, further the city expanded its horizons. And today, in the next decade of 2010 onwards, the sprawl, the densification, and the way the growth has happened it almost makes it mind-boggling. The cities have shifted from a human scale to a humongous monumental scale. Distances have increased. The boundaries are constantly changing, and within these new densities and new forms of development, the human has to find new ways of being included. Some of these densities look like this, presenting urban contrasts from the city of Mumbai. The question that we have to raise towards the end of this module is it inclusive? Is everyone included? And if that be so, is it an equitable form? Is it an acceptable form of inclusion? If the answer is no, the question is, what shall we do about it? How should we steer it forward in the urban discourse? It basically also implies that everyone must have equitable access, as we have already discussed at length in this MOOC. But what does that everyone mean? It means to reposition the intersectionalities of humans from age, gender, ability, economic status, and other cultural preferences, and any other evolving human attribute which may evolve with time, must become part of this acceptable reality of our urban systems. And this is how colorful people would become when diversity is embraced by our environments. So it brings another question which we have already touched upon earlier also, is why do we need inclusion? Friends, we believe inclusion is the only way to sustain human reality. If we look at it this way, India is expected to reach a total population of 1.5 billion by 2030 and 1.66 billion by 2050, as per the UN World Population Report. Many people, with increasing numbers of persons with disabilities amidst population growth, medical advances, and aging processes, need to be catered upon. In countries with life expectancies over 70 years, individuals spend on average about 8 years or 11.5% of their lifespan living with disabilities. The question remains is, are they included? If yes, then how? And if not, then why? India is aging, and elderly will make up around 20% of the total population by 2050. These would be humongous figures in numbers. Friends, aging population needs care and support. Do our cities, do our urban development prepare themselves for a supportive role? Or do we still have to struggle walking kilometers, finding the right public transit system in order to navigate ourselves to an average everyday life? How do we bring this empowerment, if not by inclusivity? According to the National Family Health Survey for 2020-21, India's sex ratio was 1020 females per 1000 males. We surely need to look into the needs of all genders. Only then a true perspective of inclusive urban futures would be made possible. We have to revisit the diversity and human intersectionality maps of our contexts. This diagram is a reference for us to remind us that we cannot forget human diversity as an integral starting point for looking and evaluating the urban realities that exist around us. Be it disability, be it education, be it poverty, be it economic situations, be it diverse religion and cultural faiths, all of them have to find a space within this urban reality. This brings us to understanding human interactions in everyday life. Friends, as we can see through this image, everybody means a lot of variety. Everybody means people with diverse age groups, people with diverse abilities, people with diverse preferences are all included. And urban spaces need to adapt to all of them. But this requires intense hard work. This requires some contextual studies. This requires a research-based approach, which is evidence-driven, which is empirical, and at the same time, it's human-centric. So looking at the kind of urban infrastructures we are developing, nearly 70% of the urban infrastructure needed in India by 2047 is yet to be built. Friend, isn't it a amazing phenomena? What is yet to be built needs to be thought over. But what shall be the guiding principle for these new infrastructures, if not a human-centric or an inclusive approach? We have built cases like these, which sometimes can be seen as urban realities divided by lens of densities. On one side, we see the slums. On the other side, we see housing with green pockets. Both reflect the urban inequality as a living example of urban realities. This cannot be termed inclusive in all manners, and that is what we have to look forward for. How do we cater to the idea of sustainable development, therefore? Friends, I believe one of the very strong myths that must get uncovered by now is that we need to see sustainable development on a larger whole. It starts with an environmental and an ecological view, but it adds to the social and the economic view along with it. We surely need to take along the nature and the climate resources along with us. At the same time, we have to respect the behavioral cultures and the shifts thereafter, supported with the right form of inclusive economic development. Inclusivity is the spinal axis of sustenance of human life. If we cannot be inclusive, I don't think the idea of sustenance would actually work. And therefore, as we have earlier discussed as well, it is important that we understand the interconnections and the interlinkages between the various goals of sustainable development, because none of these goals could stand by itself if it was not seen in the overlapping with the others. I have to re-highlight that the first goal of SDGs, which is no poverty, remains a very critical goal for the 21st century urban realities. If we are not able to address the issues of poverty, I believe inequality would become the most exclusive form of urban situations. Moving forward, so we have to now raise the question once again. What do we mean by inclusive urban futures? Friends, there can be many responses to this question, and I don't even want you to subscribe to only one response. However, towards a kind of concluding talk, I have to give a kind of summarized version to understanding inclusive urban futures. And I here want to say that we can look at inclusivity in urban futures from the lens of spatial inclusion, social inclusion, and economic inclusion, providing affordable necessities to everyone, equal rights and participation of all, and creating jobs and opportunities for the urban residents will make it an inclusive world for everyone. Of course, when we're looking at spatial and social inclusion, we mean the infrastructure is embedded as part of it. This requires viewing the urban realities and our cities from contextual and very distinct lenses. One of the earliest lenses is the lens of urban planning. We have seen historically how the early colonial planning happened, leading forward the way for industrial revolution. Then concepts of garden city came in, followed by radiant city planning, and then we found in the city of Johannesburg as one of the glaring examples of apartheid as a principle for city planning, which is divisive on the idea of racism. Reconstruction and development programs happened further there in apartheid and breaking new grounds for policy, and which currently integrates it in a different way. So, as an apartheid city example, it provides an urban planning lens to see how the city and its infrastructure was divided for various kinds of people, and especially on the color of skin. Middle class white group area, if you see on this side, has a completely different urban planning character, and we would find the African township little away from that. The densities of these societies, the high white society and the other classification areas, are completely different. As a view, if you see this as examples, the city character in Primrose and Makagu's area in Johannesburg, you will find this area completely distinct and these densities another form of living. Another example from Cape Town also reflects some kind of similar treatments in densities and area level planning. And this is a classic example from the city of Mumbai. The urban density is so high that slums and many other skyrise buildings have to coexist in this gray and blue landscape. The per capita green space is almost on a very smaller scale, and these questions raise an inquiry on how can we provide urban equity, urban equity in terms of natural resources, spaces for recreation, besides the spaces of everyday life and living. And these concerns have to be dealt in the next decade for ensuring that urban realities transform for betterment. Friends, the next lens is the housing lens. This is a classic example by one of the earliest Indian architects, modern Indian architects, B.V. Doshi, Balkrishna Doshi, who developed this project of an inclusive housing in the city of Indore. These are the plots with a planned framework to grow. And how did it transform this into an incremental housing context? How the housing design, which brought in interactivity at streets and in the public realm, became a very good example of social inclusion. So, how the housing lens transformed the area into a livable area with inclusion of various elements, as you can see here, the street and the house relationship, which was conceptualized here and realized here, is an effort of urban thinking in an inclusive manner. Of course, there could be today many other features which one may expect to add. For example, accessibility for persons with disabilities, for accessibility for aging populations, and many other dimensions of inclusivity could be layered further. But this is an example classically from a socially inclusive dimension catering to communities with low resources. And here we can see interconnectivity and space interactions, especially for children. How those spaces have transformed and have been in use reflects the sensitivity of architecture and an architect, which could possibly drive the agenda of inclusivity through the housing lens. Likewise, the mobility lens. These are transformations of streets in an Indian city of Pune, wherein adding more layers of accessibility, making them better in terms of landscape, services, and other features of seating has completely revitalized the public realm, making them more pedestrian friendly, like these, and like the example from the city of Amsterdam remains an example of how integrated and inclusive mobility is part of city life. From these examples, we basically learn that inclusivity is not achieved if we work on inclusivity only in one dimension of an urban reality. It requires an integral approach, it requires a comprehensive understanding, and it requires multi layered, multi stakeholder, and multidisciplinary aspects put together. So, from urban planning to housing to mobility, let's move forward to sanitation. Public sanitation remains many a times an untouched subject, but I'm happy to share here that the Indian government, since the past several years, has been making dedicated efforts towards a Clean India campaign in which the civic models of sanitation are being attempted to make them more inclusive. These efforts have been commendable, especially at the scale of rural areas and making several Indian cities and states uh, open defecation free. The next format of its further inclusivity also includes making better sanitation services across our large cities. And this remains a classical subject of a lot of, I would say, studies, such that added inclusivity through for people with disabilities, gender friendly restrooms, unisex examples of cubicles, along with amenities for children and inclusivity for transgender and others, are highlighted features in which the sanitation story of urban futures is moving towards a transition. Here is the architectural lens of assistive technologies, environmental design, and the various built environment elements, which, if rightly following the standards of accessibility, can achieve a great amount of inclusive character within them. It is important to therefore highlight that enforcement of such standards which already exist in the Indian case, like the harmonized guidelines for universal accessibility issued by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, could play a vital role in transforming from thought to reality of architecture. Further is the lens of urban public spaces. This is an example from the case of Thailand, where in the middle is the Chao Phraya River, and this was the viaduct for a transportation project which was left incomplete. And how this project got into a situation of incompletion, but later on transformed into an opportunity. And today it is known as the Chao Phraya Sky Park. Would you like to see what this space would have transformed into? On the two sides that you see are the highways which are crossing the river with multi-lane uh, vehicular mobility. And this no man's land right now is a negative space, forms the potential for revitalization. This is an interesting example to see how through landscape and utilization of this negative space the urban public realm could be transformed in an inclusive manner. And friends, here we see what has happened to this. This space today looks like this, with this intervention of an urban landscape as part of this. And this urban landscape in the middle of the important streets here, vehicular traffic streets here, reflects how inclusivity could be built in our contexts and situations, especially from the global south, where the cities are tight on spaces. This concept explains how the urban landscape with the right plant species, with sound barriers and multimodal means, including pedestrians and cyclists coming coexisting together and transforming these spaces with amphitheater as for social functions. It's an amazing example of social inclusion from the global south. Looking at this is the further characterization of the urban landscape in this area of Thailand. This Chao Phraya Sky Park remains an example of inclusivity through the urban design and urban public space revitalization. Couple of more slides to show you how it looks like, how public engages on this, and how interesting it is that it also is safe amidst the high speed traffic moving just next to it. This is an example how people come here to recreate, see the city view, and also well maintained with its integral elements of design. Having understood the idea of inclusive urban futures from these various lenses, let's have few examples further from India to understand this. India has been in the past few years growing its city missions with what is called as the SCM, Smart Cities Mission. What is important to highlight is under this mission, it has been fundamentally declared that community is at the core. The idea of sustainability, more from less, corporative and competitive federalism to ensure that the finest projects are actually built. Integration, innovation, and sustainability for sustainable solutions is the way of classifying those criteria for selecting those right kind of projects. Technology as a means, not as a goal, is a very crucial point. Many a times we are advancing with technologies, but in global south we have to be very selective and careful, especially because of maintenance reasons, reasons of cost and economic dimensions, that what is the most appropriate technology that can render us the right kind of smartness and inclusiveness. And finally, it's the idea of convergence, how sectorial and financial convergence happens in those cities. Under these smart city mission frameworks, a lot of projects have been sanctioned and taking place towards giving few examples of inclusivity in various scenarios. For example, the sensory parks for children in Chennai reflects the care for persons and children with disabilities integrated into the city environment. Likewise, smaller parks in the city of Roorkee in Odisha, making it an enabling environment for children, especially living in low income groups. The city of Jabalpur, reflecting upon projects for public realm, using various localized ways of intersecting urban landscapes with urban spaces. Similarly, accessibility developments in public transit systems, likewise in Delhi Metro, in Bangalore Metro, in Chennai Metro, Ahmedabad Metro, and so many other projects where metro rails are becoming a growing trend of Indian cities. It is also reflected that inclusive character has been integrated not just through the design of coaches and the built environment, but also through a seamless card system through which one can actually make all payments together and make the transit system seamless. So such financial models lead to further integration of technologies also in real-time traffic advisory systems. This helps people do better route planning and planning in terms of movement across the city. Development of smart kiosks in Pune are another example where smart city projects have been integrating various examples of urban infrastructure, urban furniture, digital technology, safety and resilience, and self sufficiency as part of it. They are also trying to engage the citizens while ensuring that the integration of such spaces happens with localized cultures through the right graphic and the right material usage. Many experiments on tactical urbanism have been attempted in India in the past few years, and more so in the last decade. We have seen examples on child friendly mobility and children oriented development in various cities as experiments, and that we are calling them as tactical urbanisms, where short term changes have reflected if there is a need to accept that behavioral shift and change to making things better, then that is how tactical urbanism proves and provides a lot of evidence for us to consider these projects. This is based on the WRI India's projects in Mumbai to develop safe school zones as elements and using the right kind of color systems to integrate spaces by designating them for a different purpose. At the same time, making it safer for children to cross while the speeding traffic can actually be also slowed down around this zone. So colorful guide strips, safe waiting spaces, vibrant pedestrian crossings, and signage and road markings have been part of the integral elements of these child-friendly street design interventions as tactical urbanism cases. Likewise, in the northeast of India, Kohima, Nagaland, many attempts are being made across those cities also for child-friendly spaces and promoting a better care for children in those environments. Further, streets in Pune, some areas of Pune streets have been revitalized under these smart city mission projects by adding more public seating, clearing up the land areas for better pedestrian movement, ensuring the right infrastructure to be there, and therefore also giving a green landscape and a well cared landscape as part of the integral space. These are spaces where, as a consequence, people can come together and forms an example of social inclusion by street transformation. Looking at this at the JM Road and the DP Road in Pune, including senior citizens, as we have discussed earlier also, role of resting spaces, inviting landscapes together forges a beautiful intersection between people and space. Urban futures require spaces to be playful, to be informal, as well as to be providing formal systems for various movements, including for people with vision impairments, for children, and for people of all age groups and all genders in an inclusive manner, including these examples of curb ramps as infrastructures, the tabletop crossings, the right spacings between the bollards and distinct stone materials as surfaces, providing integral pathways as part of the movement for cyclists, and adding cycling as services through digital applications as well, and designating areas for public seating as part of these long stretched landscapes. So once we have understood all this, friends, I would like to say that India and many other global south countries have a lot more to achieve in the coming years. It is important that we understand and appreciate the role and value of inclusive urban futures as a high priority zone for bringing people at the center of all these developments. Few examples and best practices from some of the global north countries are also something I thought we will share here. For example, accessible public spaces from Oslo, Norway reflects how the kind of contextual materials to their climate and with what finishes they have been able to achieve this reflects the character of that city. Of course, the population is different, the climate is different, yet there can be inspiration in terms of detailings and other dimensions that we can learn from. Other set of accessible public spaces including fishing bridges in Norway, through which people on wheelchairs, people with sticks, people with prosthetics, and other diverse mobility needs can walk through. Public amenities inside various transit stations, for example, at the airport terminals, this one is in Bangkok, including a child friendly environment in this washroom for accessibility for persons with disabilities, low height basin, tilted mirror, the urinal with grab rail supports, and the child seat along with this provide examples of how sensibly and integrally the information systems of even um, the emergency alarm have been indicated here. These are examples to show that inclusivity is possible by design, and that is only possible if we plan for it. Examples in external environment through the accessible streets crossing in Bangkok with a dedicated tactile pathway laid out. Similarly, examples of information system design inside the built environment. This is again from the Bangkok airport. Likewise, from Singapore, accessible mobility services between the bus, the public transport system, and the sidewalks. And all this happening in an integral way is the kind of future that is aspirational. This brings us to one of the most popular concepts being discussed these days, which is called as the 15-minute city, which was popularized by the Parisian mayor Anne Hidalgo. This urban design concept may be a solution to create more sustainable, equitable, and healthier cities. Friends, the concept of 5 minute, 15-minute, and a city of this scale and sustenance has been attempted by several urban thinkers in the past as well. However, it is time that we realize the value of this. It is time that we get together these efforts to understand and innovate various ways in which we can achieve this. Today, a city is becoming a complex challenge of lives. For us to move from one end to another itself, if it's taking a lot of time of your human life, I believe it starts impacting the social exclusivity. We therefore need to work towards this, and this, incidentally, is an environmentally sustainable concept as well. Having understood this, friends, it's time to wrap this up and reflect in a holistic manner again that urban living futures could either have an inclusive approach or an exclusive. They could, on one side, be enabling and empowering people, but on the other side, could be disabling. This matrix or crossroads is something we have to use in every given context of environment. But to achieve this role of enabling or disabling, inclusive or exclusive, it doesn't happen in isolation. It happens either by creating policies, so creating appropriate policies, ensuring implementation of those policies through infrastructure, through systems, through behaviors, and embedding the right technologies in those systems, and ensuring that all this is enforced together. Any part effort will not give us the impact of inclusion. And without the impact of inclusion, I don't think we would be in the directions of sustainability. Friends, I urge to all of us as professionals, as thinkers, as in whichever way we can concentrate our efforts through research, through design, and through engagements of civic societies, the idea of inclusivity must touch the ground through an empathetic approach. With that, we almost come to the end of this MOOC. But one of the last learning objectives we have is to take a quick recap of what did we learn and which modules did we go through in the past sessions. We had the first module focusing on introduction to the MOOC on universal design, accessibility planning, and social inclusion. We also understood the various concepts of demographics in that MOOC. In the second module, we focused on understanding diversity and disability. By now, I believe we would have known various types, various needs, and various barriers in position when we understand the concepts and notions of disability or disablement as a process and diversity. Then came the module 3, which focused on universal design theory and principles. This included the 7 universal design principles and 8 universal design goals, as we have learned from the Western theories. The fourth module focused on universal design from Indian perspectives. We discussed in this module the universal design India principles. We talked about cultural appropriateness, we talked about economic affordance and aesthetics as integral principles of universal design India, and contextualizing the whole narrative of universal design, therefore. Module 5 focused upon creating inclusive mobility through healthy streets. What are those principles and how those cities can be transformed by creating healthy streets is something that was covered in this module. Module 6 focused on building gender-friendly cities, and we believe we were sensitized by this module with a focus on women as a specific domain for our urban futures. Module 7 focused on children-friendly urban environments. What do they mean? Why are they needed? And what all are the insights I believe was covered in Module 7. Module 8 dedicated itself on children-independent mobility. And in this module, we understood the relevance and various concepts of children-independent mobility, also popularly known as CIM, from global and Indian contexts. Module 9 focuses on policy landscapes for accessibility and inclusion. Both from the global lens and the Indian lens, these policies were touched upon. I hope they've given us a fair idea of these legal frameworks of policy landscapes on these dimensions. Module 10 focused on design thinking as an approach for accessibility and social inclusion. It showed through and demonstrated through practical examples of transformation how empathy became integral to the part of design process, and how using it further into the process of journey mapping and creating the right infrastructure using insights participatory approach provides a huge shift in the way we actually design in our contemporary settings. Friends, towards the goal module 11, we focused on research as a significant attribute. What do we mean by it? Why is research required on social inclusion and accessibility? And what are the various tools and methods to do so? Is what we discussed in module 11. And finally, module 12, which was this module, which focused on inclusive urban futures. I truly wish and hope that through these foundational modules, we are able to develop and enhance our basic understanding towards these aspects of human-centric creation of environments. Friends, in the end, I would leave you for some thoughts with a small quote which is very thought-provoking from Ian Gale. He says, "First life, then spaces, then buildings. The other way around never works." What does this imply? On a lasting message that I wish to communicate through this is that the focus on human dimension remains critical for any environment, design, space, structure to flourish. And therefore, this whole approach of using a social lens towards the urban or the non-urban, towards the infrastructure or technological, towards the financial or political, all kinds of organizational futures require a human-centric approach, which perhaps is the best way to sustain and include. With those words, I finally sign off from this MOOC, and I truly wish that all of you who have been attending this MOOC take this forward into an applied zone as well as further spread this knowledge towards the mission of creating inclusive cities, inclusive urban futures, and inclusive environments all around us and in our zones of influence. I thank you very much for your very patient listening, and I'm happy to receive your feedbacks once you attend this MOOC in person. Looking forward to interact with you in some way or the other we could connect. I thank you once again and sign off from this module. Bye bye.